All right, time for another Rue Tale. And I'm going to tell you a story today about a guy called Whispering George. Whispering George worked the same place I did in California. This is a place called Calimex. And he did work of various stripes and varieties for the company. Did some maintenance work, did some fab, did some field uh, work as well. And good guy. And he ran into a bit of difficulty, and this became a problem because no one realized what could potentially happen with him. Of course, in California, warm climate, we had a lot of bees. And one day, Whispering George got stung. Well, that in and of itself is not that big a deal. A lot of us get stung a lot of times. However, he was highly allergic to bees. And the problem was not just that he was highly allergic to bees, the problem was that no one else knew it. So when he got stung by a bee, would go into anaphylactic shock. Well, he got stung, started to have difficulties. We happened to catch it in time and were able to get him some treatment. But the problem was that he had this condition and nobody knew it. So that when he got stung by this bee and went into anaphylactic shock, none of us were aware of it until this happened. Now, here's the problem that you encounter in a situation like this. If no one knows that somebody like this has an allergy to, say, for example, bees, and that they are liable to go into anaphylactic shock if they get stung by a bee, then you can't be prepared for it. Now, if they have an EpiPen, for example, and you know that they have an EpiPen, then you at least have a break-even chance of trying to do something to help them. If, for example, someone is subject to epileptic seizures, grand mal type seizures, or something like that, they may have a condition like that, but unless you know that, and you know there's a possibility that if they get off their medication or somehow get into a bad situation and start to have a seizure, if you're not aware of that ahead of time, as they say, for example, their supervisor, or even as one of their coworkers, then they can potentially get into a bad situation and go into, as in the case of George, go into shock. Perhaps even circumstances could occur that could lead to a very bad injury if they have an epileptic seizure and you are not aware that they have this potential, or if they're on the iron and something happens, then you are not prepared to deal with it. So there's a couple of things that come out of this, things that we should pay attention to. First, if you have a condition like this, maybe you're allergic to bees, maybe you are subject to having epileptic seizures or something like that. And I use those two as conditions. Maybe it's an issue of being diabetic, and if you start to have insulin problems or something like that, you can begin to behave erratically. For example, if you're diabetic, and diabetes runs in my family, so there's possibility of all kinds of conditions, and we bring these things to work with us. So the issue is you need to let someone else on your crew or your supervisor, someone else needs to know that you have this condition and that it could potentially cause a problem for you. Because if it causes a problem for you, of course, obviously it's going to cause a problem for them. And if they're a first responder, they need to know what your medical condition might be. So let somebody know. Now, in the case of Whispering George, we didn't know until he got stung. Then all of a sudden he started going to anaphylactic shock and we had to deal with it. You can let someone know. Now, if it's potential source of embarrassment for you or something like that, at least let your supervisor know. At least let somebody know who can respond, someone who's going to be around or someone who's going to be able to at least address your condition. So you don't have to broadcast it, you don't have to make a big deal out of it, but it's important that other people know what kind of medical conditions you may have if they're of this variety that I was describing to you. You're highly allergic to bee stings, you may be subject to epileptic seizures, or you may be subject to diabetic condition that causes you to become erratic in your behavior. These are all potential issues. So let somebody know so that your supervisor knows how to respond, because he should have his first aid CPR. He should be at least somewhat trained so that he can get you some help and so that he can understand what's going on and be able to respond appropriately. We want you to be healthy. We want you to be well. If you have a condition that we need to know about, let us know so that we can pass it on to your supervisor. You tell your supervisor yourself. You certainly may want to tell one of your other coworkers so that someone who's with you knows what could potentially happen, so we can keep you safe, so we can respond appropriately. That's what we learned from dealing with Whispering George, and it's something that's worth passing on to you so that we can all look out for each other, because we can potentially get into situations that are not good, and especially if no one knows what our particular condition is. They need to know so that they can respond appropriately and help us when we have particular issues. All right, thanks very much. Listen in again. Appreciate you.